defeating the Republican candidate by over 41 points. Democrat Keshan Scott defeated the Republican candidate William Odin by 41 points in a district in this state house district, the 50th state house district. Yep, with 100% of the results reporting, Keshan Scott, folks are talking about the 41-point overperformance, but very few folks are putting a face to the name. Take a look, everybody, as Paolo Cremita says.
South Carolina's 50th state house district has been solidly Republican for decades, like redder than a fire trick until now. Meet Keshan Scott, a 24-year-old minister who just scored a huge win that's got Republicans scratching their heads. Was it his grassroots hustle, or did the GOP mess up so badly they didn't even see it coming? Let's dive into this David versus Goliath political story. But before we do, I have a quick favor to ask. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Over 98% of you watch without subscribing, and it costs nothing but helps us a lot. So, did you subscribe? Awesome. Thanks so much. Now, back to the story. For years, Republicans thought South Carolina's 50th district was untouchable. So, what went wrong? If there was one place in the South where GOP leaders could relax, this was it. This district was a stronghold, built on years of conservative power. Think of big names like Lindsey Graham, a Republican heavyweight who's dominated the state for ages. State elections here weren't even closed, more like formal ceremonies for whoever wore the R next to their name. Saying this district leaned red is an understatement. It wasn't just red, it was Republican, through and through. But it seems voters weren't as happy with that as the party thought.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris won by only about 5 in 2024. 36-point overperformance by the Democratic candidate Keshan Scott. Of Representative-elect Keshan Scott, he's a pro-choice young rural candidate, can defeat fascism. We're getting word from the leader of the DNC, Ken Martin, who's been commenting on a lot of these big Democratic overperformances in the recent special elections across.
Now enters Keshan Scott, the 24-year-old newcomer who just crushed the competition with a jaw-dropping 41-point win. That's not a close race, that's a political earthquake. It didn't just catch Republicans off guard, it sent them into full-blown panic. This wasn't a tight race where news stations hesitated to call it. It was a blowout, so big some GOP leaders reportedly didn't believe the early results. This was the kind of district where Republicans could have run a scarecrow in a Bible t-shirt and still won easily. So no, this wasn't a lucky break for Scott. Something big shifted. One major issue. Republicans treated their strongholds like safes with unbreakable locks. They believed districts like the 50th were theirs forever. But that overconfidence backfired. They didn't notice voters growing restless. Warning signs were everywhere, well, red and blue signs. But the GOP looked the other way. That's the problem with safe seats. Parties stop listening and assume they've already won. Instead of listening, they stuck to the same old messages, assuming their voters would stay loyal forever. But this time, voters had had enough, and their frustration was the key that opened the door for change. Look at how messy things have gotten for Republicans lately. Take the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. It sounded more like a student council joke. Poorly planned and confusing, it left even longtime supporters annoyed. No one could explain what it was really for. Was it about health care, immigration, or just made for a Fox News headline? Either way, it didn't reflect what people needed. In South Carolina, it felt like Republicans were holding press conferences to admit they were lost. They were busy arguing over font choices while their political house was burning. Meanwhile, Scott wasn't throwing money at ads or holding huge rallies with fireworks. He focused on what mattered to real people: health care, education, and jobs. These aren't flashy issues, but they hit home. While Republicans were busy talking about liberals and culture wars, voters were staring at potholes and unpaid bills. Scott's campaign didn't sparkle, it connected. And that made all the difference. This wasn't luck or a fluke. Scott paid attention and he understood what people needed. So, what was his secret? Let's break it down. In a political world filled with loud voices and viral clips, Scott's campaign was, well, kind of quiet. No shouting, no dramatic catchphrases, but it worked. His opponents stuck with loud headlines, talking about woke agendas and the latest outrage. Scott did the opposite. He focused on things voters actually asked him about: roads, schools, healthcare, and jobs. Not viral content, but real life. His approach was simple, and that's what made it powerful. He talked about what he called grocery store problems. The things people vent about while grabbing eggs and milk. Why is the doctor so expensive? When will they fix this road? Where can I find a better job? In places like Lee County, these everyday struggles matter more than any debate about drag shows. Scott got it. He talked about job training, small business help, and better healthcare. Nothing flashy, just solid plans. His opponent, he ran a campaign aimed more at cable news viewers than local voters. He pushed culture war topics, ranted about drag queens, and mentioned guns like a checklist. But none of those were top concerns for the people he claimed to represent. It's easy to go viral. It's harder to win trust from someone driving over potholes to a job that barely pays for medicine. This is where Scott's so-called boring approach really worked. By staying focused on real problems with real solutions, he earned something powerful: trust. Voters didn't see a flashy TV politician, they saw someone who was actually listening. One of the biggest differences was healthcare. Scott didn't just promise change. He explained how more clinics, easier access to specialists, and helped to stop people from going broke over medical bills. In a district where healthcare is a constant worry, that meant everything. Jobs were another big issue. Instead of vague promises, Scott offered real plans like training programs for young people and support for workers learning new skills. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. He was focused on building stronger communities, not chasing headlines. Meanwhile, while Scott was talking about filling potholes, his opponent was shouting about drag queens. Guess which one voters cared more about? Nobody swerving around a giant pothole thinking, if only someone would ban drag brunch. But Scott's opponent kept yelling about culture wars, as if that would magically solve real-life problems. Spoiler, it didn't. And what's even more important, Scott's win shows how voters everywhere are shifting their focus. Research shows that working-class communities care way more about jobs and healthcare than culture war noise. And even though the GOP usually has more money and stronger networks in South Carolina, Scott proved you don't need any of that to win. You actually listen. He didn't run big budget ads. He didn't need a catchy slogan. Scott won by staying grounded and talking about real-life struggles. While Republicans were busy repeating talking points from TV pundits, Scott was having honest conversations with voters. It's an old-school strategy, but clearly, it still works. And it makes you wonder, what if more candidates did the same? Scott's win isn't just a random fluke. It's a game plan that could reshape elections in places Democrats usually ignore. He showed that even deep red districts aren't untouchable. Instead of giving up on these voters, why not give them something to vote for? Now, let's talk about Scott's opponent. How did his campaign go so wrong? It comes down to one thing. Culture wars don't fix roads or lower medical bills. But that seemed to be the whole campaign strategy. His speeches sounded like a highlight reel from conservative TV. Woke this, drag shows that, protect freedom, repeat, sure. Those talking points might get internet applause, but in real life, they fell flat. Voters in South Carolina's 50th weren't worried about culture fights. They were worried about paying bills and getting to work safely. Scott's opponent seemed more focused on impressing Fox News than helping the people who actually live in the district, and that disconnect cost him big. One voter said it perfectly: it felt like watching someone fight a ghost. Loud, dramatic, but totally useless. His campaign was all noise and no solutions. You can shout about protecting values all day, but if people can't pay their medical bills or buy gas to get to work, they're not voting to stop drag queens. The Republican campaign totally missed what voters were saying. Fix our roads, lower healthcare costs, create real jobs. These aren't big, complicated dreams. They're everyday problems. But instead of facing them, the GOP tossed out buzzwords about freedom and hoped for the best. It didn't work. In fact, it backfired. What happened here shows a deeper issue. Within the party, especially in rural districts, there's a growing gap between what Republicans talk about and what voters actually need. Study after study shows working communities care about job security, healthcare, and decent infrastructure, not culture war drama. But the GOP keeps leaning into those cultural fights. That message might still play well on TV, but in places like the 50th district, it's falling flat. For decades, Republicans assumed these voters would always stick with them, just show up, bash the left, toss in some gun rights, and collect the votes. But when people are struggling and no one's helping, that old formula breaks. You can't ignore real issues forever. Sooner or later, voters start noticing. And that's exactly what happened here. The Republican candidate's obsession with culture war topics felt totally out of step with what voters actually needed. Healthcare was a top issue across the district. People weren't asking for outrage, they were asking for affordable care. But instead of offering real help, the campaign turned every speech into a knockoff of a Fox News segment. If your biggest concern is drag queens and libraries while voters are drowning in hospital bills, you're out of touch. And the GOP didn't. Phoned it in, they spent money, mailed flyers, and hit all their usual talking points. But none of it stuck. Because what was missing was real connection. One voter summed it up best. He just didn't get it. People aren't sitting at dinner, arguing about drag shows, they're stressing about making it to the end of the month. The Republican candidate wasn't listening. He was talking past them. And that's a much bigger issue. This wasn't just a one-time failure. Across the US, the GOP is doubling down on culture wars while ignoring real-life problems. It's a risky move, and in this case, it completely collapsed. A 41-point loss in South Carolina is almost unheard of. But when your entire campaign is built around fear and distractions, you lose people. Scott didn't win because the district turned liberal overnight. He won because voters got tired of being ignored. This district has always been a conservative stronghold, the kind of place Republicans usually win without breaking a sweat. But when a party loses touch with what people actually care about, even the deepest red areas can flip. At the center of this upset is a basic disconnect. The GOP keeps tailoring its message for national TV audiences. But elections aren't won on cable news. They're won by listening to real people. As more voters get tired of empty slogans and out-of-touch promises, we might start seeing more safe Republican seats turn competitive. If that happens, the GOP can't blame anyone but themselves. They practically handed this win to Keshan Scott by ignoring local concerns. He didn't have to match them headline for headline, he just offered something better. So what does this mean for politics in places like South Carolina? Scott's win isn't just a surprise, it's a wake-up call. This race wasn't only about flipping one district. It was about voters pushing back against the noise and demanding real answers. The GOP has relied on culture wars for years, but the cracks in that strategy are getting harder to ignore. People want solutions, better jobs, affordable health care, and working schools. If Republicans want to hold on to their base, they'll need to start tuning into voters instead of ranting about woke culture. And for Democrats, this might be the beginning of a new way to compete even in the reddest parts of the country.